So after the tragedy in Connecticut, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks made several videos in favor of gun control. This is a critique of one of those videos, but before I begin, I'm going to make two assumptions. One, Cenk was arguing in good faith, meaning he didn't try to mislead his audience and he cited statistics presented to him. Two, that his goal is to stop gun violence. I also won't be making any constitutional arguments in this video. I'm only going to discuss crime. Here's my critique.
The question is, what are we going to do about it? We would like to do a lot about it. We'd like to get real legislation, getting the number of guns in this country under control.
Okay, so Cenk wants real legislation to get the number of guns under control. This means he wants to make guns illegal that are currently legal. So I have a question. What will we do if people keep their illegal guns? Presumably, for the law to work, we need to fine them or throw them in jail. We have an example of this recently regarding John Hammer, a U.S. Marine arrested in Mexico for having a gun he thought was legal that he even declared. Alternatively, this real legislation will take guns from good citizens who actually obey the laws, but criminals will intentionally disobey them. So why is this a good idea? Cenk cites numerous shootings after the Connecticut massacre to make his case.
So let me show you some recent shootings since the Connecticut massacre. Well, on Friday, we also had Bartlesville, Oklahoma. An 18-year-old was actually plotting on the same exact day to shoot up his high school. He was going to trap everybody in the auditorium. He tried to enlist help to shoot and murder everybody in there. And then he was going to try to detonate bombs as the cops tried to come and help. And then he took his own life, so that was a murder-suicide. And then in Las Vegas, Nevada, we had a man shoot a woman working at the Excalibur Hotel, and then he committed suicide.
So you get the idea. He continues for a while using numerous shootings to, as we'll see later, justify more gun control. However, he doesn't mention the recent example of an off-duty cop who shot and stopped a guy who was shooting at people in a crowded theater. It was even covered in the Liberal Raw story, as you can see here. That doesn't fit the narrative.
And the list goes on and on. We are swimming in an ocean of weaponry.
As I just mentioned from the instance covered in the Raw story, often guns are used to stop criminals and save lives, so people in favor of gun control need to address this.
People talk about video games. Video games? Movies? Well, in Japan and the UK and Australia and endless other countries, they also have violent video games. Guess what? They get the same movies we do, but we get a different result.
Remember what he says about the UK and other countries, because I'm going to revisit this.
Here's the result we get. Now take a look at this. This is violent assaults in America. Other OECD countries, that's developed countries, European Union, etc. Those are all the red lines at the bottom. The giant, enormous blue line at the top, engulfing all other countries, literally killing them, is the United States of America, where we are so much more violent.
Here is where I get into the meat of the critique, where he makes two claims. America is more violent, and he states his reason why.
Why? Because we have so many more things to be violent with.
Again, I believe Cenk is arguing in good faith, but I'm going to use Cenk's own sources to demonstrate why he's wrong. For almost all of Cenk's video, he cites Ezra Klein's article in the Washington Post titled 12 Facts About Guns and Mass Shootings in the United States. If you scroll down that article, you get to the same chart from Kieran Healy. If you follow the link to Healy's website, you'll find a few interesting things about the chart. Specifically, Healy used assault death rates, not gun death rates, and even said that his study didn't make any claims about guns, gun violence, or gun laws. More importantly, he only reviewed OECD countries, excluding Mexico. Well, Mexico has stricter gun control laws than the United States, and look what happens when Healy actually adds Mexico back into the mix. I'll get back to this, but Mexico dwarfs our assault death rates.
Would that be the same number if we outlawed guns and we only had bats, knives, mace, etc.? No, because study after study shows that if you take away guns, they do not have the same amount of violence all of a sudden with bats and scissors and knives.
Here's where I think Cenk needs to define his terms. Does violence equal gun deaths, or does violence equal violent crime like assault? I'm going to demonstrate Cenk is wrong no matter what he picks in a second, but I would like to point out that China has had a ton of school slashings, as reported by CNN and the BBC here, where crazy people run into schools and start stabbing tons of children.
It's just not true. In fact, over the last 50 years, do you know that 15 of the 25 worst mass shootings in the world took here in the United States? We're number one!
Here's where I'm pretty sure Cenk's source got this wrong, which isn't his fault. It appears Ezra Klein cited an article from Time listing the worst mass shootings, and I think Ezra may have simply done a count based on that article. But there's a problem. That Time article left out several mass shootings in other countries with stricter gun control laws in the United States. After a quick search, I found 2 mass shootings in Germany that weren't listed in that article. One mass shooting was even reported in the Washington Post and another in Der Spiegel. One talked about a guy who was armed to the teeth, but that shouldn't be possible with the strict gun control laws of Germany. Other mass shootings were also listed at zero hedge from countries with stricter gun control laws in the United States. So this top 15 of 25 doesn't appear to be accurate.
We're number 1 in violence. We're number 1 in mass shootings. 15 out of the 25 happen in just one country. All right, here is, according to a study by economist Richard Florida.
Cenk tells us that according to Richard Florida, there is no correlation between gun violence deaths and higher population, stress, immigrants, or mental health. But what he does find correlated is the following.
States with tighter gun control laws appear to have fewer gun-related deaths.
Sure enough, Ezra Klein's Washington Post article listed the Richard Florida study, so let's examine it. It leads to an article in The Atlantic with a heat map of states. The heat map looked at the number of deaths due to injury by firearms per 100,000 people. All of you should probably be asking the same question I did. Injury isn't necessarily assaults or violence. And how did it code for gun control? Well, he looked at 3 types of gun laws: assault weapons bans, trigger locks, safe storage. Wow. So we aren't even looking at laws that make it easy to buy a gun, carry openly, concealed, or anything. I think this is important to know. Let's dive deeper. If you click the map link, it takes you to statehealthfacts.org. You can see the same heat map and a list of firearm injury deaths per 100,000 people. At the bottom, it lists the source of all this data, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention of Health Statistics, specifically Table 19 of the National Vital Statistics Reports. So I opened the National Vital Statistics Reports and I scrolled down to Table 19 where I could find the data for the heat map. Here we are. What you'll notice is that on the far right is the exact same data from the previous website. But the most interesting thing you'll see is that the left side of the chart has the data that actually tests violence, the number of assault deaths per 100,000 people by state. What sticks out immediately is Washington, D.C. and Utah. Washington, D.C. has strict gun control laws, yet the highest assault deaths. Utah has less strict gun control laws, very high gun ownership, and low assault deaths. I made an Excel spreadsheet of all these numbers to get a sense of what we're looking at. What you can see is that some states with lots of guns and permissive gun laws have very low assault deaths, and the opposite with other states. Some states with lax gun laws still have high rates of assault deaths, but you cannot make that argument for all cases according to the data. In fact, the Daily Beast looked at the most armed states and found that Utah was one of the most armed and Washington, D.C. was one of the lowest. So that's not even just gun control laws, that's simply total number of guns. Now I'm going to get into my favorite part of the critique, looking at the United States compared to other countries with stricter gun control laws. Specifically, I'm going to look at violence, not just deaths. Civitas put out a report based on United Nations statistics comparing OECD countries. I'll look at some non-OECD countries in just a second. Here are some really interesting statistics. Mexico crushes almost all other countries, as we saw before, based on homicides. The United States is number 3. But you're more likely to get raped in Australia, Sweden, and New Zealand than the United States. Robbery is also really fascinating. You're more likely to be robbed in Belgium, Spain, Mexico, Chile, Portugal, France, England, Wales than you are in the United States by a massive amount. Okay, what about assault? Look at this. Scotland, Sweden, England, Belgium, Germany. Wait, where's the United States? We're below almost everyone. I thought Cenk said the United States is more violent. What about burglary? The United States isn't even close to the top. In fact, the likelihood of someone breaking into your home while you are home is exceptionally rare in the United States compared to other countries. And they've surveyed criminals who have specifically said it's because they worry about getting shot in the United States if they break into a home. So I know many of you might be saying, well, a dead body is more reliable in terms of a statistic than assaults. Okay, let's look at Russia and Brazil, who have stricter gun control laws than the United States. According to The Guardian, Brazil has a massive multiple of gun deaths compared to the United States. Many, many more. And according to The Economist, they have a massive multiple of our assault deaths, too. The same is true for Russia, according to The Independent.
The more guns, the more gun-related deaths. Of course, come on. Anybody who denies it is being ridiculous, is being purposely stupid. It's one thing to say, hey, look, man, I believe in freedom. I know more people are going to die, but I love my guns. And, you know, whether we like it or not, it's in the Constitution. Those are fair arguments. You can make those arguments, okay? But you can't tell me that more guns doesn't equal more death, because it's not true. It's not factual. The fact is, more guns definitely equals more deaths.
See, I showed you the same statistics that Cenk used, and I came to a very different conclusion. I concluded you might have more injuries, but not necessarily more violence at all, often the opposite.
Well, they say, well, look, these assault weapon bans, etc., they don't work. Really? Do you know that since the assault weapon ban put in place by Bill Clinton lapsed in 2004, the number of mass shootings has doubled since the ban expired?
Reason wrote an article about this. First, violent crime is at a 40-year low in the United States, and mass shootings are not at a rise to a statistically significant margin because you're dealing with such low numbers to begin with. Reason even had a chart with a blue line at the bottom to demonstrate that we aren't having major upswings in mass shootings.
Doubled. Now, and then you will get, oh, well, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. Oh, just look at all these different numbers that all show more guns equals more deaths. And so, I don't know, it could have been something else. It could have been video games.
Cenk's argument only works if you ignore Russia and Brazil, as Thomas Sowell often brings up, which have stricter gun control laws than the United States, if you ignore Mexico, if you ignore Utah or Washington, D.C., if you ignore the violent attacks across Europe, as I already brought up, then, of course, you can make Cenk's argument.
No, they have video games in other places. They just don't have the kind of weaponry that we have. And I've also shown you in the past, we're number one by a long shot in guns per capita, 89 guns per every 100 people. Yemen comes in at a lowly number 2 with 55 guns for every 100 people. We are sick in the head with guns, and it is, according to the numbers, according to the facts, according to the endless shootings happening every single day in America, literally killing us.
As I close this critique, you might be interested to know that I don't own a gun and I've never fired a gun, but I care about the evidence and the data, and the evidence and the data demonstrate that gun control is a bad idea. Even if the evidence demonstrated the opposite, how do you plan on getting rid of the 89 guns per 100 people without having it horribly implemented and lead to bad results?